Welcome back to Endure Beyond, the #1 human efficiency podcast. I'm Elle. We talk a lot about the future: artificial intelligence, space exploration, longevity, human enhancement, new economies, new worlds. But there's a question almost no one asks honestly. Are humans actually ready? This is episode 583, Human Expansion Readiness, Why the Future Demands a Trained Human. Today, we're not talking about science fiction. We're not talking about hype. And we're definitely not talking about optimization for likes or aesthetics. We're talking about readiness: biological readiness, psychological readiness, emotional readiness, social and generational readiness. Because expansion doesn't begin with technology. It begins with humans who can endure complexity, isolation, uncertainty, and responsibility. That time is now. Welcome to the show.
Discover Houston. Recommend vector transfer to the BFS.
Good people and inhabitants of planet Earth, friends and allies, both foreign and domestic, welcome to Endure Beyond, the safe space for human enhancement and excellence, where we marry the disciplines of sports psychology and exercise physiology to deliver value to you and to carry forth our duty of developing the leaders of tomorrow. But not just the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders who will courageously lead from the bottom up, and who will also lead from the front, but most importantly, to lead by example. It's a place where evidence-based research and human capability reign supreme. And I want to thank you all. I truly want to extend my gratitude to you all for joining me here. And I don't know of any other show like this. And frankly, I don't really care. I am honored to be here with this show, with you guys, and how it has evolved over the past 7 years. Maybe we're not dominating all the charts yet, but I believe our mission is so wholesome, it's so grand, and we will and have affected so many people in positive ways that there's no reason why we can't continue on that train. And in fact, I know with only a short period of time here, it's going to multiply and magnify. Most podcasts only make it past 20 episodes. They don't make it to 20. Most never make it to 50. A very select few make it to 100. Now we start getting into the hundreds, the numbers go down and down and down and down. Sure, there are some out there that have some big names to them that have been in business for decades that are reigning at the top of the charts using their name likeness. But this one is special because after all the obstacles, after all the letdowns, after all the silences, after all the shadow banning, after the episodes being taken down, after the lawsuits, after how many people complain saying that we gave them advice that didn't even happen, we're still here. And to me, that doesn't just speak about myself. That doesn't speak about our team. What that really does is speak about you. It speaks on your loyalty. And I want to say thank you for being a part of what makes humankind great. And together, we can continue to ensure that humankind, this version and the next version, will be the best it possibly can be. But before we get into it, I want to say never forget why we do what we do, that our self-sacrifice is for the next generations, for the ones we love, self-preservation, so that they can build, create, multiply, and amplify capability on paved roads. None of us would have the capability in the progress that we do today without predecessors that came before us that did the same exact thing. Visionaries who were called crazy, delusional, irrational, cynical, psychotic, obsessive, and every other name that you can come up with. They were called that probably multiple times. And when all odds were against them, when their backs were against the wall, when they faced death, when they faced the law, when they faced defeat, when they faced the biggest enemy, themselves, they found something within themselves to keep moving forward. And because of them, we have advanced technology, we have upgraded quality of life, and most importantly, we have opportunity. And as far as opportunity goes, I believe there's no greater time in all of human history than right now to take on the opportunity. One thing I have to say, guys, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever your goals are, whatever your passion is, you are your own architect, your own creator, your own builder, your own scientist, your own researcher. We are simply here to give you the tools to better your capabilities. I can't pretend to know you. I can't pretend to know what you've been through, to know your story, or to tell you what to do. I'm not your doctor. I'm not your licensed medical professional. I'm not your therapist. I'm not your financial coach. I'm not your mom, dad. We probably aren't even related. So take my words as a guy who wants to see humankind win, who dives into the research, into these topics, and compiles them in a way that then become what we have typically referred to as actionable intel, something that you can take away today and use. But like a tool, whether that be a fork or a spoon, a screwdriver or a drill, even nuclear energy, let's see, even cold fusion energy, what really matters is how you use it. So here in Endure Beyond, for those of you that may be new, all right, as we do a little bit of housekeeping, the way this show works is we have what's called a short form and a long form, and we alternate between the two. Now, the short form is typically off the cuff, whatever we wanted to talk about on the day, ensuring that it at least is backed by some sort of evidence, some sort of research study, mixed with some personal and professional experience, and then delivered to you in short form, typically less than 15 minutes. And then we have our long form, and the long forms follow what's called an explain, empower, invite framework. And we use that based upon many data points to determine this is the best way to synthesize and produce an information in these disciplines that people probably didn't even know exist. You've probably heard about psychology, but you don't really know what sports psychology is. To us, what kind of mental frameworks or mental models do the 1 to 0.1% use to make them better at their craft? It's not to just tell you that if you do this, you will be a better doctor. It's to say that the highest performing, the top echelon of individuals in their fields have overlaps. And these are the overlaps that we found. And then we look at performance physiology, not just the study of how the body functions or the way that the systems work together in one functioning ecosystem, but how do you then improve those systems? How do you ensure that the investment can be as minimal with the maximum return of investment? But even then, that's not guaranteed. It's just about what the individuals in the top echelon of their practices actually do to be the best at what it is that they do. We identify the gaps in the research, the overlaps in the studies, and we present the overlaps in a way that if you had no freaking idea about what this stuff was about, at least you could walk away a little bit smarter, a little bit more efficient, or at least you could brag a little bit and say, hey, look, this is what I learned, Jim. I'm a little bit better than you. Because in our opinion, there's nothing wrong with some healthy competition, because healthy competition brings out the best in us, especially for athletes in a hyper-competitive landscape like we have today. But again, our goal is to always deliver value to you. So we want to say thank you for continuing to support us. Thank you for continuing to be a part of what makes this great. And thank you for leaning into what is probably, I would say, the most fun topic I have ever gotten into. And for those of you that don't know, I'm a performance physiologist by trade. So I study this stuff for a living. And we've created many things from that. We've written books. We've obviously created this podcast. We've quite recently, within the last couple of years, created software to solve some problems in health, human efficiency, and longevity. And in the past, we've even had supplements developed. And who knows, maybe that'll come back in the future if we decide to. But the point is, we're always exploring different areas of how to produce more value and how to make things better for you guys. And that drive has led us into this topic of what's called HER, human expansion readiness. And we're basically observing as much about humankind as we possibly can and saying, okay, what is the current status of the species? Where are we at? If we take even the law of averages, we say the low end, the middle end, and the high end. Where do we project that to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And what does that mean for our capabilities as a species? As you know, it seems as though every day there's billions being poured into the space industry. So that means for us, the next level is, okay, well, what does the human tech interface look like? Who are the big players? Who are the big movers? How can we be a part of that? And what does it really take for this version of us, first one ever, as far as we know, to be a spacefaring society, to regain that privilege? That's a hefty question. But you know what? If there's anyone who can answer it, and if there's any time, it's us and it's now. So this episode, as you heard, culminates many of the things that we've talked about. The future, artificial intelligence, space exploration, longevity, human enhancement, new economies, new worlds, all of it. But we decided to ask the question honestly and say, hey, look, we're talking about all these things. We're building the tools and technology for all these things. But if we are always on human enhancement and human optimization, are we actually ready? Are humans capable to be their best, to perform at the apex in this next era that we're leading into? And that's really important because we're not just talking about science fiction anymore. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, you'd hear Stargate SG-1, or you talk about space, the future, and these things would be arbitrary science fiction pieces of someone's imagination. But now, as you can tell, they are reality, and we're heavily leaning into them. And the future isn't waiting for humans to catch up. It's already here. So, as an introduction to these topics, a reinvigoration, and it's our hope that you'll join the mission, that you'll be a part of what's going to make us all great. With that being said, what's going to happen is Elle is going to take 5 research points, 5 of the most prominent questions in these studies, and mix it with some of the things that we've done over the past. And we're going to present it in a way so that you understand when you walk away from this, you are a part of something bigger. You are a part of something critical. Even if you aren't a part of our organization, you are a part of the next era of humankind. And that matters. So throughout these 5 questions, as I said, I will dissect them to the best of my ability and present what I believe as someone who obsessively and relentlessly studies the human platform, human enhancement, and civilization readiness and performance, what this will look like in the coming future. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Elle, my dear, first question. Let's give these people the value that they came here for.
Question 1. What is human expansion readiness? And why does it matter now? Let's define terms. People hear human expansion and think Mars, AI, or transhumanism. But you use the phrase human expansion readiness very deliberately. So first question, what does human expansion readiness actually mean, and why is it suddenly urgent?
All right. So human expansion readiness, is not about where we are going. It's about what kind of human arrives there. And to really make this make sense, I want you, the listener, to think to a time where you had to move, where you had to go to a new city or to a new job, or you entered a new relationship, or you were taking on a new endeavor. I imagine, because this is typically the way that the human psyche works, you considered all the things that could go wrong. And why we assume that to be true is because humans naturally operate off survival. You want to protect yourself. So you think about the ways that things go wrong. And the next most viable step is to then think about what you would do if they went wrong. Because we won't say when. Maybe the job didn't work out, or you moved to the new place and people didn't accept you because of who you were, or who your partner was, or how you looked. A number of things. You play these scenarios in your head, not because you're a cynicist or because you're negative. It's because that's how humans are hardwired. And I think that's a great thing. I think for a species to be so conscious that before it takes on a major task, it considers what the potential consequences would be, puts it in a great state. And to me, I identify that state as preparatory. And whenever you're in a preparatory state, I see it as you're better prepared for success. And we even realize this to be true with studying some of the greatest athletes. Athletes are the greatest models to, especially at the D1 and professional level, they're the greatest models to observe because they are not only able to live personal lives and be great in those lives, but also on courts, on fields, in stadiums, in domes where the pressure is the highest. And in those moments, it's merely just a culmination of things that they've did thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times. But one of the most powerful things that we've noticed that they do is preparing to take that game-winning shot, preparing to take that goal, preparing to take on the enemy, preparing in case something goes wrong, in case they get an injury, in case they fall, in case they lose. Because the more prepared they are, they know the better chances of success that they have. And success doesn't always look like winning. It doesn't always look like taking the gold medal. It doesn't always look like, coming away with the trophy, coming away with a championship belt. Sometimes it looks like being able to take that loss on the chin and observing what you can do next time to do better. How did I mess up? How can I be better? Where in my practice or in my training could I have done something differently so that next time or for the next phase, the next iteration, that I'm better, that I will win, that I'm sure that at a bare minimum that I'm getting better. And most of the time, that actually doesn't even happen physically. It happens in their mind. In the Duro-Human Paradox, a book I wrote a few years ago, that's its subtitle is The Treatise on Human Durability. The purpose of that was me observing what happened during COVID, what we did pre-COVID, where we made the mistakes, and then where we could have improved post-COVID. And if we didn't improve, what would reasonably happen based upon the chronology of vague actions. But in there's a chapter on perception and imagery. And in there, we kind of outline what makes athletes so great. And it's essentially what I just told you. It's their ability to perceive and to imagine, perception and imagery, situations before they even happen. And what you've probably heard before that I'll just quickly highlight is that the brain doesn't know the difference. The great thing about the human subconscious, and it's quite a double-edged sword, is that, it doesn't differentiate positive and negative. It doesn't differentiate real from fiction. It takes neural and chemical signals. And when it gets a repeat of signals, it believes that to be the quote unquote truth. So if an athlete continuously pictures themselves being great, or even if they have a recovery or have an injury and they picture themselves recovering from that injury, they begin to entrain themselves. It's actually called entrainability. They begin to entrain themselves on how to take that situation and get success from it. This is why, of course, with talent, why athletes are great, why some of the greatest athletes continue to be great, why they have longevity in their sport. Because if you think about it, you could have all the talent, you can have all the resources, but if you have none of the execution, you won't win. And most of that execution comes from psychology, the study of the mind, your cognitive process. And we've had plenty of episodes about that. This one really won't be about that. But the point is, that's the approach that we're taking with this whole human readiness thing. We ask, why does it matter now? Well, it's always mattered because exploration is always par for the course for humankind. But now we're exploring into realms that we aren't used to. When we migrated west, we had things like manifest destiny. There were already humans that were living there. We just progressed with technology. We just introduced colonists and explorers to different worlds. So now what we're doing is taking people that are used to a few biomes and expanding the horizon. But we have to ask a few questions to say, okay, well, what have we done in the past that hasn't worked? What are we doing now that's great? What are we doing now that can be cut from the list or have the fat trimmed? And then how can we use that smaller, modular, more efficient model to then apply to the future? So when people hear human expansion and like you said, they think of Mars, AR, transhumanism. Expansion isn't optional anymore. There is no opting out. And it's happening whether you like it or not. Technologically, cognitively, socially, environmentally. This is the move. But the problem is this. We're expanding externally faster than we're adapting internally. I presented this in the Human Manifesto as an inverse model where technology is rising, human capability is going stagnant. And if we look at this historically, every major expansion required training. Sailors crossing oceans, polar explorers, astronauts, special operators, even scientists in extreme environments. Shout out to the scientists out there in remote observance stations, I should say, in like Antarctica, deep in the Arctic. We've never sent untrained humans into hostile systems and expected survival. Yet today, we're dropping average humans into nonstop cognitive load, algorithmic pressure, meaning erosion, okay, because we're removing a lot of their jobs and saying, go forth and be human now, social fragmentation, dividing the patriarchy, and constant novelty and zero recovery. You don't really get a break unless it's forced. And even then, is it really a break? And yet, here we are. Surprise, they're anxious, exhausted, and dysregulated. So for us, in our studies, human expansion readiness is the discipline of preparing humans for environments they did not evolve for. This includes space, of course. And if you've been with us, you've probably heard of our lasso model, the land, air, sea, and orbit. And then you've probably heard of some of our prior models of subterranean, subsurface, even confined team cohesion models. What it would take to maintain a muscular profile in 0G, and you know, even what it would look like to maintain a civilization underwater. So we're not just including space, but we're including modern Earth and all its beautifully diverse biomes. And her exists because optimism is not a strategy. You can't make progress on optimism alone. You have to have some systematic, programmatic, incremental that leads to transformational change model. And that's what this is, ladies and gentlemen. As we've built up into this point, what many of you have come to realize, because you've even messaged me about it, is that it's not just about talking the talk. It is about walking the walk. And that starts with preparation and progresses with training.
Question 2. Where are modern humans failing the readiness test? That leads to the uncomfortable part. If we were honest, not optimistic, where are modern humans failing the readiness test right now?
The question is, where are modern humans failing the readiness test? And if we were honest, from where I am today, I can look back to the Dewey human paradox and some of the creations we're building using the gaps in literature and some of the efficient models we're producing and say it's in 4 areas. And I don't believe since probably 1965 that those areas have actually changed. Just the mediums in which they are tested have changed. And in the Dura-Human paradox, the introduction was primarily about the stress that COVID placed on the entire population. It was one of the first times, whether you believe in conspiracies as a social experiment, or if you think it was the government or the World Economic Forum or whatever you believe in, if we look at the facts of how it affected major communities, it's not because something radically was introduced and, like the bubonic plague, wiped out most of the population unwillingly. And what we wrote about, and again, take this with a grain of salt, is because a very stressful situation was introduced to a population that was entrained by institutions that didn't have their best interest in mind on stress reduction models, where we have come to realize that better, more efficient models are stress management practices. I could ask my father and my father's father how stress was talked about in their generations. And whether or not you see it as cultural, stress was never talked about as something that you manage. It was always talked about as something that you try to reduce. You need to be less stressed. You need to reduce your stress. You need to do something so you're not as stressed. You need to de-stress. Well, what they didn't really say is, like, if we translate that physiologically, stress is par for the course. It's a part of life. In fact, you could say it's almost necessary. Now, what happened when we fast forward a couple decades is that we were using old school, untrained models to take on a new practice. So where people were naturally taught to just avoid stress or just to reduce it, they couldn't physically use those models anymore because they didn't have the ability to. How do you reduce your stress where all of your stress reduction techniques are gone? They don't even exist right now. So you really don't even know how to properly manage it. You don't have any other outlets. So that first place that we observed is physiology under chronic stress. People were exposed to stress over a long period of time. People had businesses that they were running for probably, I don't know, generations, that were closed down overnight, seemingly, because of this. And whether you agree with those practices or not, those people didn't have things in place to prepare for something that may have shut down their business. So because they didn't have other layers of, like, okay, how do we continue this if something goes catastrophically wrong? They didn't observe how could we prepare for this if the worst case happens and we got to shut this place down. How do we keep the business going? How do we problem proof this business? Now they're calling it COVID proof. And instead, when it happened, people were left with nothing. They were left with no backups. It's like the same thing with savings. And if a bank closed down, it's like you had all your assets in one place. And now that one place is locked. And now you have no assets. These things are proof all throughout history. So for us, we don't have to reinvent the wheel or even try to make stuff up. It's really from an observational capacity. How can we see where mistakes have been made in the past? And then how can we observe what we're doing now to be better? And we looked at these chronic stress models and we named them. We named them bunnies because by trade, bunnies are necessary. Bunnies are cute. They're part of the ecosystem. And we know, and I'm sure you guys know, that bunnies have this uncanny ability to replicate. They hump a lot. And the numbers go up. And when the numbers go up, what they consume goes down. The prevalence of what they consume. And that's just the way an ecosystem works. So one of the models that we talked about in the Darius paradox is the highest Karatas root. And it was this fictional root I made up for these bunnies just to make it make a little bit of sense. And it was, if you think about it, if you have the highest Karatas root and its only predator is the bunny, it doesn't become threatened until the replication rate of the bunny outperforms its bud to seed maturation rate, meaning that if the population of the bunnies grows too fast, then what it can grow and prepare for, it will outperform it and it will eventually die off. That's how things go extinct. And that's essentially what happened with this model. We named them instant gratification and comparative socialism, Ingrid and Cosmo. And these bunnies just outpaced our ability to keep up with them. So for physiology under chronic stress, we've normalized exhaustion. Like getting poor sleep for some reason is like a badge of honor. And I don't get the most sleep, but I can function off a few hours of sleep. There are some people out there that glorify it. We glorified inflammation, glorified metabolic dysfunction, and then come to realize that that's not readiness, that's fragility. So all these things came to a head when the world had no choice but to shut down. And then all it truly did, in my opinion, was highlight a lot of the improvement that the species actually needed to make. So the second part is cognitive endurance. And humans are overwhelmed by information, but undertrained in judgment, which is why we have formally made it so everything that we do in this show is backed by evidence. And we even created symbiotic research engines and symbiotic research coaches for that reason. We don't need to give you more information. We need to give you a better way to utilize it. In an age of information and disclosure, we don't need to throw more at you. We need to tell you how to use what you already have. So attention now collapses faster than tasks finish. So it leaves most of the world with a lack of cognitive endurance, undertrained, and overwhelmed. Third would be emotional regulation. And this doesn't just apply to the 1% elites and how you develop into one. This applies to everyone. Emotional regulation is a critical component to the human experience. Left unregulated or unchecked, it can have irreparable consequences. People mistake suppression for strength. Again, I can ask my father's father how emotions were talked about in his generation. And we have to realize that we're coming off a generation where the science was limited, but it was culturally acceptable to suppress your emotions. And we didn't realize how much that dysregulated relationships. Now, because that dysregulated relationships, it broke one of the common core competencies of human experience, and that's connection. If we don't have connection, we don't have family units. If we don't have family units, we don't really have progress. If we don't have progress, well, what stops us from being the highest Karatas root and actually going extinct? So suppressed emotion, we've noticed, it even leaks into decision-making, relationships, and most importantly, leadership. And then fourth, the last place would be meaning and cohesion. In the Darius paradox, we also presented one of the schools of discipline by Viktor Frankl of logotherapy. And if you don't know what logotherapy is, I suggest you look into that. It's a very good school. In fact, we'll leave the link to the Darius paradox audiobook and physical copy in the show notes. But the truth is, humans can survive hardship, but not purposelessness. That's why one of the greatest questions is always, what is the meaning of life? In the school of logotherapy, Viktor Frankl presented that consider that the meaning of life is to find meaning in life itself. Simply the pursuit gives you purpose. But without purpose, without the pursuit of purpose, humans cannot survive hardship. Okay, when they go through struggles, when you go through bad things, or you go through challenges, adversity, and difficulty, if you don't have purpose, you're doomed. So expansion without meaning leads to collapse. And if we look at some of the more hardcore studies, And long duration missions, isolation studies, Antarctic bases, even subsurface submarines, the failures are rarely physical. They're psychological and relational. In fact, I can tell you this from experience, going through indoctrination to be on the bomb squad. I remember seeing some 6'4", 6'5", just country bumpkin guys, super big. You're like, oh, that dude's definitely going to make it to the end. You had some guys who had PhDs in chemical engineering. They had masters in all kinds of different disciplines like mechanical engineering, explosives. They grew up in the backwoods shooting guns, building explosives, probably making meth. I don't know. I can't validate that last one. But they had so much more experience than the rest of us who were just getting out of high school and, we're going into this thing. And we're just like, dude, this is, we can't stand up against these guys. Like, they have all the resources and we don't. And at the end of that, you can imagine who were the ones left. It weren't the big brolic guys, the ones with all the resources, actually. It was us. The people who had a purpose, who didn't have anything to go back to, who had something to prove. And that was our purpose, to be a part of something bigger. And that is what got us through those moments, at least for me specifically, when you're on the beach at 3 a.m. getting sprayed with water, rolling in sand, and then you're running up and down. You have to do push-ups and pull-ups and lift weights, and then you go into a classroom and there's a fire hose of information, and you learn about disposals and chemical explosives and warfare and biological weapons and nuclear weapons and all this stuff all day. You don't have any family or access to anyone, and then it's like over and over and over again. That'll weed some of the strongest people out. And that's just an expansion of readiness into, like I mentioned at the beginning, a new place. It's just a placeholder in your life. But that has to be backed by a mission. And that gave me a lot of clarity in understanding that the failures are rarely physical and that they are psychological and relational. And that's just the warning sign. In the future, will not be kind to untrained purposes and untrained nervous systems.
Question 3. Why human enhancement is about survival, not superiority? When people hear human enhancement, they often think power, speed, intelligence, or longevity. But you've said repeatedly, enhancement isn't about becoming more powerful. It's about remaining functional. Explain that.
I have said it before, but enhancement is definitely misunderstood because we frame it through ego. And the next phase of enhancement is not about becoming extraordinary. It's about remaining coherent under extraordinary conditions. My only caution with this whole thing about human expansion and even human enhancement is that there are going to be some entities out there that get so overzealous, that don't follow the ethical rules, that are moralists, and they just want to be expeditious. They'll try to skip over the steps, and what will happen is we're really going to screw this whole thing up. And the reason why I say that is because you can kind of see it happening when someone pushes something too fast without actually entraining the underlying models first. And with the human platform, that I believe that's very possible. If you enhance someone with next gen technology, let's say, but their emotional regulation is that of a 12-year-old, you're gonna have a bad time. you're gonna have a bad time, and you can't really remove or inhibit or alter their emotional regulation capability, because then at some point you got to say you're not even human anymore. You're completely removing the point of this whole thing. If you create a synth, it's one thing, but they still have the same trainability models. The model has to, in some way, have the ability to do to alter the 4 areas that we talked about earlier. The physiology under chronic stress. It needs to be able to understand stressful situations and how to adapt to them. It has to have cognitive endurance. It has to be able to take on a lot of information under load, to be able to discern, to visit worst case, best case, most likely scenario, and to be able to do that not only rapidly for the recall, but consistently. Imagine if you had a soldier that went into battle or went into on a mission, and they could only execute one time. They landed and they were like, all right, we landed, and they froze. They need to be able to, once they land, discern a stressful situation, know what to execute next, how to maneuver, mission accomplishment, and get back home. That's cognitive endurance. Emotional regulation. They need to be able to keep their shit together. That's just period. The same thing goes for whatever we create next, whatever form of humankind comes next. Again, my biggest fear is that our adversaries will try and skip that. And when they try and skip that, my hope is that it's not even fear of them, right? Let them crash and burn in their programs. But for our program specifically, even from a national defense capability perspective, is that we don't follow suit with them. We don't skip what needs to happen in order to try to meet their timelines, because they may get there first. But just because they get there first doesn't mean they're going to be more successful than us. We may get there after them, but we're going to have more longevity, more skin in the game. And look at America, for example. It's the country that got here last, yet it's the one that everybody flocks to. It's the one for the American dream. It's the one where you can bring anything to life. You can do anything. I mean, people cross waters and try to do things illegally, mind you, just to get here. And there are other countries that have existed for thousands of years. They were first, but they're not the best. So especially with us, when we start translating the human tech interface into reality, I think it's important to realize that you got to have people like me on these programs that have an understanding of what it means to not just do it fast, not just to do it efficiently, but to do it right, which it is the combination of both. So this whole thing is really about remaining coherent under extraordinary conditions. So for me, what that means is sustaining clarity under stress, regulating emotion under isolation, maintaining physiology under constraint, thinking ethically, because I have to mention that word quite a bit with amplified tools, and then enduring without losing identity. That's survival. And enhancement in some cases can be about superiority, right? How can we help people live the best possibly that they can? If we're going to new biomes, if we're going to new worlds, it's going to take more than just what was required on Earth. But remember, survival is a key part of that. You cannot thrive without survive. You can't have either word without vive. It's life. So the strongest people will already dominate. But what will happen is, if you go back to my story earlier, it's not about how strong you are. It's really about how adaptable you are. So take for the sake of argument, even if you were to transfer someone's consciousness on some chip or some logic board into another being or into a synth humanoid-like bot, if they didn't have those factors that we talked about in train first, the cycle is just going to repeat itself because they don't know anything better. Maybe they aren't susceptible to the same laws of like physics and detrimental physiology as a human platform. But that doesn't mean that they're more capable or more prepared, right? The preparation happens before you do something, not during. So it's one of the reasons why we created Human X the way we did. It was originally designed as a way to just identify the truth, as an evidence-based tool to co-locate all these studies from these major databases and to find what the research says. At first we called it a pro-meta-analysis, and then we called it a research synthesis. And then we developed the symbiotic research coach, not as a productivity tool, not as a fitness app, but a literal symbiotic research coach. You want a program that you can follow. You have to. What's the best way to do that? Take what a research team would do, their capabilities, their knowledge, some of the top trainers, and then make them have a baby, and do it in the fastest time possible. So what the SRC is able to do is what a team of trainers and a team of researchers combined could do in probably a couple weeks or a couple months in a matter of seconds. And this is really important because no protocol matters unless it fits. It fits your body, your environment, your mission, your constraints, but you dictate that. And if you put in enough data, then you give it exactly what it needs to know to make sure that you get what you need, because readiness is contextual and static plans fail dynamic futures.
Question 4. Why the future is symbiotic, not human versus AI. Let's talk about AI. A lot of narratives frame the future as humans versus machines. Replacement, obsolescence, competition. You argue that the future is symbiotic. Why?
Yeah, so I first presented this argument in a book I wrote, I think, shortly after the Human Paradox, and it was called The Human Manifesto. You can get that in the same place on like Amazon, and I think we did an audiobook, so you can probably get it on Audible and books as well. But this is before companies like Perplexity or the model Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, GPT 5.2, I think it is now, before they became as mainstream as they are. And I got so curious about what these language models actually were, because at the time I was obsessed with the human brain as a programming model and what language models it used and how those models determined performance, like what was fed and then what was the outcome produced. And I started to see how they were developing them. And I was like, oh, it's funny how it almost looks like they're being mimicked after the same programming that the brain had. Like it's literally following the pathing of a human. So I figured, I was like, I don't think it's going to be as crazy as people envisioned it. Like there was these radical stories about AI taking over and taking everyone's jobs and enslaving us, and like Terminator and Big Brother and Skynet going live and all these like things. And I was like, one thing that humans have an uncanny ability to do is to catastrophize. And I'm like, you can look at nuclear energy and say, well, we have the power. Oh my God, we have the power to destroy the world now. This is the end of the world as we know it. Or you can say, this is some powerful shit. We actually have the ability to save the planet now. We have the ability to create small modular communities that are powered by this fascinating energy. You think about cryo, cold fusion, all these things. You're like, that used inappropriately, it can be weapons, but used appropriately or effectively, they can be pretty awesome tools. But that's with anything, right? You could look at fire like that. You could look at the spear like that. You could look at a screwdriver or a hammer like that. But the point is, I looked at AI as another tool. It's like now we're able to synthesize information and to understand complex models of multiple communities across the earth. And I thought that was really fascinating. And what really poised the question of the Human Manifesto was like, if this tool is developing so rapidly, then the human model will have no choice but to catch up. And when it does, it will be one of the most powerful relationships throughout all of history. And we're kind of seeing that now, as far as some of the companies adopting artificial intelligence. Yeah, some jobs were removed, but look, that's not AI, man. That's Some people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Some people are not contributing anything and they're just sucking off the system. So that was going to happen regardless of how AI went or not. And it needed to happen. But you also look at it on the other end and see how productive people have become. People who need information, people who want to create, people who want to add back to reality, and they're using artificial intelligence as a very creative tool. And just as we said, it's becoming a symbiotic relationship. And you'll hear that word quite a bit. I mean, we already mentioned it with our symbiotic research engine and our symbiotic research coach, because it's a combination. There is no, in my mind, human versus machines. It's always been humans plus machines equals efficiency. And we're just seeing that happen at different scales because both sides fail alone. Artificial intelligence can't exist without human iteration, and human capability without artificial intelligence to magnify and multiply capability, it's just going to lead to stagnation, which is what we saw. So humans fail at scale, precision, and data synthesis, where AI fails at meaning, embodiment, ethics, and context. So the future human is not replaced by intelligence, contrary to belief. The future human is trained alongside it. And that's the core of the Human X update. A symbiotic research coach doesn't tell you what to do. It just helps you think better. It translates all these complex ideals. Like if you've ever gone on the PubMed and looked at some of their studies, you'd probably be like, dude, what? This abstract alone is so confusing. I mean, look at these numbers. What is P equals 0.005 mean? Like what? People don't know what that means. So they're only subject to what the synthesis says. And it's like, well, if the researcher only produced that synthesis for someone in that discipline to understand, well, there's a mistranslation. And funny enough, that has been one of the biggest problems for scientists, probably since the beginning of science, is being able to translate what they do into plain language. I mean, it is very hard to understand a lab rats or scientists, the white coats. This sounds weird now that I say it. The people who study this stuff day in and day out, it's hard to understand what they do because they fail at properly translating it. Like the whole idea of a message is only good as it's communicated. You can deliver any message you want. That doesn't mean it's actually going to be received well. So you have to know your audience. And the problem is most of the time, researchers and scientists, as someone who started off their journey in a R1 Research Institute, they don't know their audience. And I don't even think they're so nerdy and so smart, they don't even care. So they miss that translation piece and don't understand why they're so misunderstood. And it leads us to why our role was to be that mediary ground. Like, how do we take the research, the super complicated, just nitty gritty stuff that majority of the population doesn't understand, and translate it and present it in a way that is actionable intel. That's something that people can use. Like most of the time, they don't care about the numbers. I just want to know that you did what you were supposed to do. You did your research. You said you did it. I'm going to trust you. And how does that help me? Okay. And that's what this is. So when it translates research into personalized protocols, adaptive strategies, and even environment specific readiness, it becomes a mirror and a filter. But symbiosis only works if the human is trained. Remember, I said if you try to skip the steps, like I'm almost predicting that our adversaries will try to do, and it will crash and burn. Then you're going to find yourself at the end with wasted resources in a model that doesn't work. And an unregulated human with powerful tools is dangerous, but a regulated human with powerful tools is transformative. And that alone is what led us to create the DIRT Explorer platform. And DIRT is a dynamic environment readiness test. And we basically said, okay, let's compile everything that we learned, all this information into a short snippet test. Okay, so if someone was like, hey, am I ready for these environments? How can I actually test that? Because I don't want to have to go and spend a week in the desert and then travel to the Arctic and spend a week out there, and then go to a submarine and spend a week down there, and then go to a cave and spend a week down there, and then train for years, and then maybe get a spot at going to space or going to maybe low Earth orbit if I'm lucky, or wait for Mars to be a colony or the lunar gateway to be finished. Who knows when these things will be finished? We're doing our best, but what can we do, as we mentioned earlier, from a preparatory stance? So dirt, we were like, all right, so why don't we take all this information, give the citizen the ability to test themselves. And it combines the four areas, like we said, the four austere environments that follow kind of like the same lasso model. And we were like, well, let's see what the results are. And not only does it compile all these data points, but it gives you the ability to see where you're at. And it gives you a path of how you improve moving forward, whether you want to be in those environments or not. Say, if you want to go to a very hot climate, it tells you and teaches you as you go along. And then you can have a plan to follow, all based upon research. And then Explore was a tool that we created just for fun. It was like, all right, well, we're talking about human expansion, so why not give somebody a tool to say, hey, let's test your personality, let's see what role you would actually be in, as we follow this whole human expansion readiness thing. Like, maybe you're going to be an AI symbiote, maybe you're going to be a researcher on a remote station, maybe you're going to be a mission commander. And it was just really fun because it then takes the things that we grew up on that were just science fiction and then brings them to real life testability. So, it's great to see these things come to life, but we have to understand that human expansion readiness, is the training ground.
Question 5. How do we actually train for expansion, individually and generationally? Final question. If readiness is trainable, what does training actually look like? Not abstract ideals, but real preparation.
So this is a really good question, and we're going to talk about this in detail for our Endure Beyond Goals subscribers in the exclusive access for this version for many reasons, because this is not content that we can just give out to anyone. It'd be ridiculous if we said, okay, here's all this work that we did, now here, take it for free. So it's pay to play, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want to know exactly how this works, how you can optimize your performance on numerous levels, you can subscribe at Endure Beyond Gold via Apple Podcasts. And we're currently in the works of creating a platform where you can kind of go outside of that. So for all of you that gave us feedback that do not have Apple, shame on you, first of all, for not being a part of innovation. But personal preference, whatever, man. But we're working on something so that you are included as well. So I would say it happens in layers, and it alludes to what we talked about in the Dura Human Paradox, what we talked about for the Dura Explorer platform with Dura Human X, and the Human Manifesto. And first is about physiological durability. You must have the basics first before you do anything else. That's why a lot of these explorers were chosen for these programs, because they mastered all of the basics over everything else. And that's what's extremely important. So sleep, metabolic health, strength, endurance, not aesthetics, all right, durability. This whole thing has always been about endurance and durability. Hence, it's in the name. Layer 2 is cognitive clarity, which translates to things like attention control, decision hygiene, research literacy, and pattern recognition. That last one is extremely important. I don't want to give too much away, but because we know the brain works on pattern recognition, your most powerful thing is not just recognizing the patterns, but being able to interrupt them. Layer 3, emotional regulation. We've beat that cat quite a bit. I don't want to say horse because I love horses. BT dubs. So yeah, I don't even think there's anything else I need to say about emotional regulation. Besides like communication with self, stress processing, and like the athlete's recovery from failure. Layer 4, and this is going to be a new introduction, relational cohesion. And we talked about this in depth in our guide about confined team cohesion. And it is about trust, conflict resolution, and shared meaning. Okay, I want you guys to remember that shared meaning part. And then layer 5 would be the generational continuity, which in short terms is how do you carry it forward? And obviously the way we carry things forward is through parenting, education, and a value transmission. That's why Proto-Parent was commissioned and why it exists and why it matters. And then it's why within the Proto-Parent ecosystem we created Madre, because the connection matters. And it's why her exists. Why we created Dirt Explorer, why we've written The Dear Human Paradox, The Art of Muscle, The Human Manifesto, and more recently, Money, Power, and Health, just to bring it all together. It's why we have now a symbiotic research engine and a symbiotic research coach. Thanks for continuously breaking that, guys. I appreciate that. It just kind of helps us understand our limitations and how we can get better. But the truth is, for all of you out there, expansion-ready humans don't appear spontaneously. By you being here, you're being a part of that. Just listening to the information, piquing your curiosity. But I would say if something challenged you, if you're curious, foster conversation, open a dialogue. That's really the most important thing that we can do at this time. And you know, future humans will be built deliberately over time, not manufactured overnight, not reiterated artificial intelligence technology that's just masked. That's something that's been done in the past. Because the future doesn't need perfect humans. It needs trained ones. I want to thank you guys for joining us here on this episode. I think it's 583, but don't hold me to that. There's been so many. I want to thank you because even if your investment doesn't help me, it helps future generations. My kids thank you, my kids' kids will thank you, and my kids' grandkids will thank you. And I think it means a lot to know that what we're doing here will carry through generations. It's what was done on a small scale for us, and it's what we're then magnifying to create paved roads to do on large scales for transformational change for generations to come. But remember, nothing great happens unless you take massive action. Thanks, guys.
Today we learned something sobering and empowering. The future is not waiting. Expansion is already happening, and readiness is the missing layer. That's episode 583 of Endure Beyond. If this conversation shifted how you think about the future, explore human expansion readiness with DIRT, future planning with Protoparent, and the evolving Durhuman X, where science becomes personal and readiness becomes trainable. Links in the show notes. I'm Elle, that's Darius, and this is Endure Beyond.